Helo, nos ydda, croeso I noson gymdeithasol Ffoton. Welcome to another Ffoton chat, and we'll go through some slides with our guest photographer and musician, Mr. Simon Bray.
Good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, how are you doing?
All right. Well, I think we're having a few technical difficulties.
Okay, classic. Yeah.
You know, it's I don't know whether a virus has hit the Ffoton site or YouTube or whatever, but nevertheless, I think we should motor on really, since we are now live.
Let's go for it. Yeah.
And having a chat. We're going to talk about your collaboration with an artist this evening called The Edge of These Isles. And when did the project start, Simon?
So Tom and I had met doing the Three Peaks Challenge. So we'd met through a mutual friend, and sort of each of us had done the Ben Nevis, Scaffold Pike and Snowdon in 24 hours. You know, stupid thing you do when you're a bit younger and you've got lots of energy and you've not had kids yet. And sort of he was, you know, he took it very casually. He was kind of trotting up these mountains and making sketches as he was going, and I was really interested in what he'd done. So we met for a coffee afterwards, and he was saying how he wanted to sort of make lots more landscape work, and I'd been shooting landscape work for a while, and I said, oh yeah, I'd love to make some landscape work. Why don't we, you know, arrange a trip together? So we both live in Manchester, had an affinity for sort of just general landscape work, and it just sort of made sense. So this must have been maybe 2013, something like that. You know, a little while ago now. But the whole thing took us a couple of years to make. So yeah, around that time, 2013, 2014 sort of time.
Is landscape your first love?
As a photographer, absolutely, yeah. It was something that I was just drawn to from, you know, visiting places like the Lake District or Snowdonia or Cornwall, you know, going holidays and seeing family, and it was the first thing that I really wanted to point my camera at, and that really got me excited. So this, as was my first sort of major project, I suppose, was quite a natural thing to direct myself towards, really. Yeah.
Hey, we're back with your photographs, which is really cool, and I believe this is the Lake District. So an amazing shot.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is Buttermere in the Lake District, which is a sort of beautifully calm, serene spot. And to sort of start the project off, Tom and I sort of asked people, friends and family, and on social media to recommend, you know, their favourite places in the UK that we could go and visit, and we wanted to try and cover plenty of different landscapes, but also, you know, a variety of places across the different countries. But you know, it's only a couple of hours away, and our friend Neil had suggested Buttermere as, you know, as his favourite place in the world, really. So we thought, why not go there? So we booked ourselves into the youth hostel and took a trip, and we learned an awful lot on that first trip. You know, even in the first sort of hour or so, I sussed out that, you know, Tom as an artist wanted to sit and sketch for a long period of time, and I'd set my camera up and taken my first few shots and thought, okay, right, I'll see if we can move on. I turned around and Tom had sort of barely opened his pencil case. He was still picking his tools. So it was, you know, that allowed me, even initially in the first hour, to sort of, you know, slow down a little bit and to take my time in terms of observing and waiting for the light to move and seeing what was changing in front of me. And then this is Tom's impression of the same view. So he uses lots of different mediums when he's working in the landscape. He's taking sketches, but then he would obviously go back to his studio and use pigments and paints, and then also this has got a layer of wax over it. Yeah. And then lots of things are quite abstract as well. So this, for example, was a view through the valley of Crummock Water, which is just along from Buttermere, and, you know, that the abstract lines sort of represent the mist which was hanging in the valley there. So rather than being a sort of a very literal depiction, he sort of uses shapes and gestures to represent different things.
Did you share photographs with him after you'd been on your trip?
Yeah, and he was interested to see what I was observing, and I was very interested to see what he was observing. And I think initially I was just there to try and sort of take the best photo I could, if that makes sense. And I mean, that sounds quite obvious, really, but that felt quite naive once I'd understood Tom's process a bit, which was on location, not to just see the bigger picture, but to find an aspect of the landscape which really interested him, but also to use his sort of all of his senses to create a real sort of emotional connection with being in that place at that time, and to try and get some of those, distill some of those ideas down into his notebook, which he can then take away. And obviously he's got the sort of luxury of time there to dwell on things and to let that soak into the work he was making. Whereas obviously as a photographer, I had to sort of respond quite quickly. But I mean, the image you're seeing here is from Lindisfarne. I don't know if anyone's listening's been to Lindisfarne, but it's famous for its history and the castle, and it's a stunning place. And actually, this is probably the last shot I took of the day, just crossing the causeway back home, and that stick in the ground, and that was very much instigated by conversations that I'd had with Tom about finding something in the landscape that piqued my interest. And I presume it's a marker there to judge how high the water is, but in that, because the tide comes in and out every few hours, but that really caught my attention, and it isn't something I would have considered taking a picture of before. I was always looking for sort of the beauty before, and this was something that looked quite bleak, but piqued my interest, and so I think we started to try and find quite, not intentionally, but find a sort of affinity with what each other was making, not in a formal sense, but I suppose we couldn't help but sort of be influenced by how each other was working.
Yeah. Did you sort of, did you go off piste? I mean, you had to leave him to do what he needed to do, but were you visiting other areas within that landscape, or, did you separate? Did you spend the whole day looking at these things, or not?
Yeah, we were very much together the whole time. It was very much a joint effort. So, as I said, I like to keep moving as a photographer. I like to sort of be on my feet and keep, seeing what the light's doing, but just, taking as much in as I could. And so we sort of sussed out a balance between, putting ourselves in one spot for a little while and then agreeing on we can move on and get going. But it was very much a dedicated trip together for literally to each location for only maximum 48 hours at a time. It's not elaborate long trips. These are quick jaunts, and the schedule's based on our availability around work and family and that sort of thing. So it wasn't a case of having any funding or anything like that to try and go off and make this work. It was all self-initiated and self-funded at this stage to try and see what would happen. Basically, it was a bit of an experiment. And
this is the Brecon Beacons.
Yeah, this is the Brecon. So we'd been recommended the Gower Peninsula, which Tom had visited before, but I hadn't, and someone had mentioned the Brecons, and again Tom had been, but it wasn't somewhere that I'd ever been through. I'd been to Pembrokeshire an awful lot, I'd been to Snowdonia an awful lot, but the Brecons really intrigued me, and so we sort of stopped on our way down and just found sort of car park lay-by, and just thought, right, we'll walk up there, see what happens, come back down, and we knew we were aiming for the youth hostel in Brecon for the evening, and it took me by surprise because I just had the most fantastic day as a photographer. The mist and the light were just incredible. We really grabbed my attention, and it was chilly, and we got to the top and we couldn't see a thing, but as we were walking up and then as we were walking down again, I couldn't believe how lucky I was getting with the scenery that was unveiling itself before me.
If the weather had been totally inclement, would you have still done it?
Yeah, I think so. We didn't, we weren't trying to plan around the weather necessarily. We weren't trying to plan around, being there at the perfect time. In particular, it was a case of, particularly with this trip, it was a case of, well, let's take our chance. We're driving down to the south coast anyway. Why not see what this area, the Brecons, has to offer? Yeah. And it was silly, really, because we started on this walk, and after about an hour, Tom said, "Oh, do you know where we're going?" And I said, "No, I thought you were leading the way." And that was usually the case with the trips. I would sort out all the practicalities and where we'd stay and the drive and all the walking routes. And and I presumed because he'd been there before that he knew where we were going. So we would absolutely, I lost course, just ambling up and seeing what we could find, and that was the best way, because we sort of, as a team, we sort of followed our noses and went the ways that excited us, really. Tom kept wanting to stop and collect some of the earth to make pigments and stuff later on that he could put into the work. And I wanted to try and get as high as I could to try and see as much as I could as well, and but also chase the weather and chase the clouds and see where that led us as well.
And this is Tom, yes, yeah.
This is Tom, yes. This is Tom's reverse, not his better side, but he you can see that's the map on the back of it. That's how yeah, he obviously wasn't taking much time to look at it, but yeah, this is Tom, and he would take little snaps with a little digital camera as well.
Yeah. What did you learn from working with an artist?
Well, this is the crux of the whole project, and I alluded to it before. But I mean, as a photographer, you're working in the moment. But actually, for me, it was about gathering that sense of connection with the place that you're in. Using all five senses to really allow yourself to sort of engross yourself in a landscape, and not just have a preconceived idea of what you're aiming for, but to respond, and there's so many other factors in that, whether you're hungry or need the loo, or you've been walking all day and you're exhausted, but actually all those things can feed into the sort of experience of a place, and whether you feel like you want to be slow, or whether you want to be in a hurry, or whether you want to get up high, or whether you want to stay in the valley, and the birds and the wind and the smells and the feel beneath your feet and the weather, and so all that just and that was what Tom was doing. Tom was soaking all that up and allowing that to influence the work that he was making. And it was only after that first trip that I understood that that's the process he was going through. And so and then this is a good example of and something that was for me at the time was extremely abstract thing to photograph, but as soon as I took it, that image sort of evoked the sense of what I was experiencing in that place, on that hillside at that time, and that made things like that started really resonating with me, in terms of I'm photographed something here that represents how I feel, and that was new to me. It was about me understanding why I was making this work. I knew how to make it. I knew when we were going, who I was going with, where we were going to a certain degree, but why we were making it was, because we tasked ourselves with doing it. But actually, in the moment, I was beginning to ask myself, why am I taking this particular picture? What am I responding to that allows me to take that? Draws me to taking that photograph.
Was this the only black and white shot you included in your work?
I think there's probably others. I think there was a series of these images as that cloud moved across that are included in the book. And I think the first shot that we saw of the Brecons was originally in black and white for the exhibition as well. Right, okay. So some of these images have had a sort of different life as time's passed. But I think this moment in particular that we're looking at now, and the subsequent images that were taken within a small time frame, 10-15 minutes, really went on to influence the future sort of landscape work that I made, which was almost purely black and white. Right, post this project. Okay. I've now sort of moved back into working with color again as well, but these sorts of moments and finding the drama in the black and white really did have a sort of profound effect on how, particularly because Tom was drawing with pencils and charcoals in his sketchbook, and I could see what he was trying to sort of capture with the gestures he was making.
There's some beautiful lines in the Brecon Beacons, I find, and you've captured it there. That path that leads up to the top. It's a nice shot. I like that shot quite a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's not somewhere I've got back to yet. You go somewhere for a day and you think, oh, I'm going to come back, as soon as I can, and it takes a bit of time and concerted effort to get back there. But I won't ever say never to me and Tom going back to all of these places at some point and seeing what work we would make, however many years on.
Yeah, there's a great route actually called the Horseshoe Route in Penyvan, and that is spectacular because you hit different angles, and it's like I've done it a couple of times. It's a long walk, but well worthwhile. Look it up. This is Rosili. I know.
Yeah, this is that. So this is where we're aiming for, and you know, as much as we were staying in the youth hostels, we'd stay up late and have a drink and you know, make the most of the time together. And then I'd be getting Tom up ridiculously early to chase the sunrise, which he as an artist he didn't necessarily feel inclined to do. But this was the that's not a slight on artists, by the way. It's just Tom's inclination of being away from his young kids, who obviously get him up at God knows what hour. But this in particular was an occasion which the sunrise was just magical, and Tom just I don't know, he just soaked it up. He absolutely loved it, and it was, for me, I was playing a lot with sort of filters and grads and all that sort of stuff on the front of my lens, and that just got a bit faffy, so I just stripped them away because it was very windy and I couldn't keep it still for long enough. And just once I caught this frame, I thought, you know, that captures the sort of sense of scale.
Yes.
And again, somewhere like this, it was very, very easy to just take a very aesthetically pleasing picture, you know, particularly when you're pitching yourself to photograph at sunrise or sunset. You know, it's very hard to sort of escape the colours and the light and the sort of beauty of somewhere. And you know, I still very much believe that I want to capture beauty in my photography. I think maybe this feels like a very obvious photograph that might have been seen many, many times, and that's not because, you know, we made a concerted effort not to look at imagery before we went on trips. You know, we wanted to know where we were going, but we didn't want to you know, have these preconceived images in our mind of what has everyone else shot when they got there. But I suppose when you arrive and you walk out on that cliff edge, you can't help but want to take that photograph.
Absolutely, yeah, it's a wonderful place. I love Gower, and this is another shot from the Gower. Maybe you'd like to explain a little about this one.
So this is Three Cliffs Bay. So this is sort of just over the other side from Rosili, and we wanted to explore a little bit. So we went from Three Cliffs Bay onto the Mumbles and just tried to get a real sense of the drama and the landscape. I mean, for me, this my family's in Cornwall, and it evoked a lot of sensibilities of the Cornish landscape as well. But and we wanted to make the most of the light. You know, I think we were only working for an hour or so, but you can see the sun's fully up here, and so we sort of just took the chance to we shot from, we worked from this side, and then we sort of went back round, so we were shooting sort of through the bay out to sea as well. But this angle in particular just sort of caught my imagination in terms of the sort of structure. And I've always wanted to try and use a lot of sort of negative space in landscape imagery, so using a lot of the sky or a lot of the sea, and so this just you know, this sort of just worked for me when I arrived. It just sort of all clicked into place. Yeah,
it's funny that it's funny how these places like obviously Cornwall and Gower and places in Pembrokeshire, the light, the quality of light is kind of is unexplainable, I think. And I mean, it's obviously a draw for artists of all sorts, you know, and Three Cliffs has been painted quite a lot. And actually, there's in the church near there's actually a very beautiful stained glass window down of Three Cliffs, which is quite magnificent. Yeah,
I'll have to go and find that on our return trip. Whenever that is.
Yeah, you will.
Yeah, and another sort of a closer up shot of the same view as the tide was coming in.
Yeah, and no people.
No, I mean, it was very early, very early.
And we're up at Scotland here.
Yes, so we're up to Glencoe now. Again, another sort of youth hostel trip. I didn't sleep a wink that night. There was someone snoring in this sort of communal room, and but I mean, this scene just took my breath away. We arrived, you know, 5 a.m. or something as the sun's rising. It was into the, but we got out of the car. And I thought I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And there was a few other cars about, and I looked out, and you couldn't move for photographers with tripods taking pictures of this view. So there's a couple of other chaps who've got exactly the same shots as this potentially. But you know, we arrived when the sun was still down, and it just rose over this sort of large sort of tundra type flat plain before the highlands sort of jut out into the sky, and that low mist was just hanging in the valley for long enough for the light to catch it and just warm everything up. And you can see even in this picture the sort of gradient between where I'm stood through the water that just still has that greying, like bleak sort of coldness to it before you get into the warmth of the light. So it was a real special time. I mean, I could have spent an hour and then left, but we spent some time in the valley, walked through the valley, and then up to one of the peaks and down the other side, and that was, I mean, we're spending an awful lot of time here together on journeys and on walks, and all that time Tom and I are talking and talking about our processes and how we're engaging with the spaces that we're in and what we're seeing and what's catching our attention, and you have to be sort of very sort of compassionate with that relationship to understand what each other's requirements are, especially when you're getting up. You're getting someone up very early. You want to sort of make sure you're looking after them through the rest of the day. But I mean, getting up to the top of the peak was remarkable, because you could just see it for absolutely miles and see over to Ben Nevis, which was very special considering that was where Tom and I had sort of first got to know each other on that three peaks walk.
Yeah, and were you ever? I mean, you say you've been to Snowdonia. Were you tempted to go to Snowdonia, or was it was time constraints and that held you back from going there? Or did you make a list before you started? Yeah,
we sort of made a list. Once we'd done that first Cumbria trip, we sort of reassessed what the locations that people had suggested, and I think at that stage we wanted to get a balance. So we were conscious not to spend as Englishmen all our time in England, and very aware that the landscapes in the rest of the UK are far more interesting and dramatic than a lot of what England has to offer. So we made sure that we covered Wales through the Brecons and Gower, Scotland through Glencoe, and then also Northern Ireland, which was the last trip, and we went up to the north coast in Northern Ireland, and that was just a case of balancing it out. So Snowdonia was the first place that we went to once we completed this project, to try and see if we could make new work, I suppose. And so it was very much high on our list. I mean, I've made work of my own accord in Snowdonia, which was exhibited at the Millennium Centre in Cardiff 2 summers ago for the Festival of Voice. We sort of partnered up lots of my Welsh landscapes with some of my work from India and Rajasthan as part of the sort of uniting of the musical cultures of Wales and Rajasthan for the Festival of Voice there.
Cool. It's always a difficulty with landscape, because if you're visiting places which people know of or have seen in other pictures, is to try and avoid the cliche at all times. Do you know what I mean? Cliche can be, it's very tempting, isn't it, to be?
Absolutely, yeah. And I don't think I'll hold my hands up and say that I didn't avoid it to a significant extent. This was very much my first project as a photographer. Right. We were visiting places that people had recommended because they are sort of tourist hotspots, and people that draw a lot of people, they draw a lot of photographers and artists. And so I think what Tom and I held on to was the fact that even though we were going to these places that were very, very popular, that actually it was the collaboration which made what we were doing unique. And that in terms of going on to deliver the project to an audience through various means, that actually there was enough interest there, because I could have gone to all these places on my own and taken very similar photographs, but they would have been similar, but not the same in terms of being informed by the relationship between Tom and I. And then obviously what we're seeing here is the majority of is the photographs, but actually for most viewers of the project, whether it's through the book or exhibitions, is actually they've seen my work and Tom's work, sometimes side by side, but certainly within the same space or on the same page, and that gives a very different effect as to how you perceive what the project meant as a whole.
It's really funny standing on high when you look at mountains. They look quite. I've done this myself. I stood on top of a place and looked at the scenery below, and it looks so small, doesn't it?
Yeah, just absolutely dwarfed. I mean, Ben Nevis is in there, and I think the size of the clouds as well, and especially in terms of the scale, sort of really make it feel like it's sort of minute. And I mean, again, I'm using a lot of negative space with the sky, so I could have easily have included a lot more of the valley there to feel like that you're sort of grading up to the peaks. But actually, I wanted to try and represent somehow that sort of vastness of what we were seeing from that peak. I mean, that contrasts with the next image, which was taken. This is Tom's. This is Tom's appreciation of looking through that valley, just down to the right of where that previous photograph was, and seeing that mist. And I mean, and his interpretation of there being a shape of mist in the center of that valley, but then it's the sort of dotted line is alluding to the fact that it's shifting, it's moving, it's sort of almost alive, and so some of it feels sort of semi-realistic, but then he's very much putting his own sensibility into each piece.
Yes, indeed. I love this shot.
Yeah,
I really love this shot today.
So this is the first thing in the morning again. So sort of going back to when that sun was rising, and I mean, I think I'd been looking the other way towards the sun, and I just turned around and I knew I had to take that shot extremely quickly. Just one frame was all it was just to get that reflection off the bothy of the hut there. So
it's actually a reflection. I thought it was actually a window with a light in it. How bizarre is that?
Yeah, so it's the reflection of the sunrise in the window.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I mean, it was there for seconds and then gone.
Do you stay in this bothy?
No, stuck to sort of 17 quid youth hostels or whatever it was. but they serve a very good purpose, youth hostels.
Yeah, indeed.
And then
where are we here?
This is the final trip, Northern Ireland. So this is Carrick Reed. So there's a sort of famous rope bridge, but we sort of wanted to try and, I don't know, it felt very different. We had to fly, and we had a cameraman with us who was making the project documentary, which we sort of put out at the same time as the book and the first exhibition. And so it felt different having somebody else with us and sort of filming us and asking us questions and sort of interrupting our flow a little bit. And I think I didn't quite know what to photograph, really. I think I'd got to a point in this stage of the project where I sort of really wanted to avoid the cliches. I didn't want to just photograph what I thought everyone else was going to photograph, and to try and find something that had my own sort of stamp on it, my own personality, because I could see slowly but surely Tom's work evolving and being just so very much of him and of his sort of artistic voice that I really sort of felt the need to try and so I think that meant I struggled actually in Northern Ireland. The weather was pretty awful. We got wet and snowed on and hailed on, and everything under the sun seemed to fall on us in that sort of over that weekend. But this was one of the shots that I came away with and just felt it sort of represented where we'd been and my sort of sense of this, I suppose, the ruggedness again, the sort of
it's quite harsh, isn't it?
Very harsh, yeah. And as everywhere we went, it was just so characterized by the proximity to the sea and to the coast. So it just seemed to sum it up for me. And then this was Tom's piece from Northern Ireland, and he works a lot, as a painter, but then also a lot in relief, a lot in 3D. So works a lot with wax coverings over pieces. And then this was sort of a quarry. So he wanted to try and represent something of that sort of the gap, I suppose, that we were stood in. The path leads through, and there's actually some small figures within the piece that you can see from the bird's eye view that represent sort of he and I suppose, in that sort of landscape. And so he went through quite a few iterations of this piece, and I just found it fascinating because I couldn't have made something like that. I could have stood at the top and photographed the whole, as it were, the quarry, but he can sum that up in a piece in a very different way to me.
This is interesting. We were talking about this earlier. I mean, maybe tell me a little bit about this.
Yeah. So so Northern Ireland was formerly the last trip, but we wanted to try something else out. I had this idea, and I thought, let's see if this works. So actually, we went to the Peak District, which is less than an hour away for us, and we swapped mediums. So the photograph on the left was taken by Tom. So I gave him my camera, gave him a quick tutorial on how to use it, and he ended up taking a photograph better than I probably would have taken that day.
I think maybe he was lucky because of the weather, Simon. I think the weather and the way the light is shining on the top of that hill, little squall in the background. It's
sure.
I think he would have taken that one as well.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, he didn't have to, I had to dry the camera off with a hairdryer afterwards because he didn't know how to look after it as a piece of kit. So there was, but anyway, the image on the right is a drawing that I made of a similar view, sort of back down the valley, and that just gave me such an appreciation for the skill set that Tom had. He's obviously been to art school and learned the sort of craft of what he did, and so for me to try and portray something. And it just felt, I just think that looks so flat and there's no depth in it. And I've tried to put in some drama and some texture and stuff, but it just doesn't do the landscape of the Peak District justice in the slightest. So, but it was, again, it was all about this collaboration. We were learning so much from each other and really appreciating what we were each offering one another.
Yeah.
And so this was the last thing we did before we went on to sort of deliver the project, as it were. So we were very fortunate to receive some Arts Council funding for making the last trip to Ireland, and then completing the book and making an exhibition, which was at the Whitworth in Manchester. So I think we've got some stuff coming up of showing us how we did that. But there was a couple of shots that of Tom's studio, and I spoke to Tom earlier this week, and I wanted to see what he had to say about sort of where we're at now, as in what did he think we learned from the project. So I'll just read, if that's okay, very quickly what he said. So Tom says, my thoughts on the Edges work would be to keep empathy and persistence as the focus, especially when in a collaborative project, as most things in life are. So to actively aim to leave preconceptions behind that speak of how the work would finally emerge. So I think I alluded to that as well in terms of leaving behind the sort of those preconceptions. And then he says, empathy with the subject matter and your collaborators, and a persistence to keep working in spite of weather and relationships, and to stay open to one another. The quality of the work and what it actually means will usually come later, and that's okay. He says, I think we were incredibly lucky, or I feel I was in working with you, which is very kind of him. And he closes by saying, I don't know that I did these things that I've mentioned here in the above sentences, but they are what I can see now, the years after the culmination of the project. And so, I suppose that's on reflection after quite a few years of considering how we did have to have a lot of empathy for one another in how we wanted to work. Yeah. But we also had to have that persistence to keep going and keep going and keep going, and sort of dig into what each of us wanted to do, but also meet and find that point at which we could create something that was sort of united as a sort of body of work, which is easier said than done, really, when you're both working in very different mediums. Obviously, we've been to the same places and we've had a lot of conversations, but to try and sort of tie it all together, particularly when Tom's work was so abstract and mine was so literal, people come with far more questions to Tom, and they come to me with, oh wow, I'd like to go there, sort of thing, and there's a very different response to those two pieces. So it was really interesting, and we had to be quite careful about how we sort of matched everything up and presented it.
Would you work collaboratively with other forms of or other artists, such as writers or poets? Is that something that tickles your fancy?
Yeah, 100%. I'm extremely open to working with anyone of any sort of creative medium, really. I mean, we got a friend, a writer, to write the foreword for the book, and he came on that Peak District trip, right? So he could understand a bit more of the dynamic that we were developing between Tom and I. But I mean, that didn't go on to inform the work we were making, but we wanted to make sure that we were including a writer. But I mean, I've been very fortunate to work in sort of cohorts of photographers, so with 5 or 6 other photographers as a collective to make bodies of work, and that led me down paths that I never otherwise would have followed, made work I wouldn't have otherwise made. I've been very fortunate to work with Manchester International Festival and being part of their sort of talent development setup that they run every couple of years, and that's with artists from completely different, so classical conductors and composers and filmmakers and choreographers and anything you name it, and again, just to see how other people engage with their subject matter and draw on draw inspiration from what they're engaging with, but again, just having those conversations as well. As photographers, it's very easy to sort of get caught in the bubble of photography and we've talked about cliches and things, and it's easy to sort of, you just feel like you're going around the block with photography, but actually there's a huge amount of other stuff that can inform what we work on. I mean, in the book we list all the music that we listen to on the journeys.
Right. Well,
I mean, music's hugely important for both Tom and I. And so listening to Stravinsky, like the Rite of Spring on the way down a valley in the Lake District, or something. He's a big fan of Bowie and Eno, and so he took the liberty of educating me on that, and I would teach him some stuff that I'd learned on doing my music degree and that sort of thing. And so again, that really evokes something in us before we'd even arrived at a location. So and again, we found a lot of affinity in sharing the music. There's a lot of trust going on there. You're in a car with somebody. You might be in a car with somebody for 6 or 7 hours. You don't want to put a dud record on that they're going to hate for 45 minutes.
Certainly not. I mean, the design of the book is interesting because you designed the book as well. Did you, Simon?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, and I was very pleased with it at the time. I think we were able to pull together some really nice strands of obviously my photography and Tom's artwork, but also lots of Tom's sketches. We took time to photograph his sketchbook, so we could sort of see a bit of the process. We each wrote sort of a diaristic aspect for each location. As I said, we listed the music, we had the foreword. So I wanted to put it together, and looking at it now, it feels very busy. It feels like there's too much, and I think actually I would have benefited from having someone to edit the sort of image selection, particularly on my part, just because I feel like I overloaded it a little bit. But actually, as a body of work, I'm extremely proud of it. I know Tom is extremely proud of it. Particularly as a book, to have that artifact and know that we made it, it's sold out, and there's a certain amount of people that own that and can look at it and share it, and it's a very nice feeling to have that summation of our first major project together.
Cool beans. And also nice layout for an exhibition.
So we were very fortunate to have one night at the Whitworth in Manchester, which is one of the public art galleries, and as you can see, just about we mapped out the British Isles in sort of slate stone on the floor, and then placed one of Tom's pieces and one of my pieces according to where it fitted on the map on the floor. You'd be amazed at the amount of people who walk in a room full of art and don't look at the floor and kick stones everywhere. But it was, again, we're trying to add lots of layers to it, to the experience. So, on that night we had a discussion between Tom and I, as well as presenting the work. We showed the 25-minute documentary. The book was on sale. We had the drinks all from the different locations, so with beers or spirits or whatever, all taken from the locations that we'd been to.
So the marketing was important then, Simon?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was, we'd worked so hard for a couple of years on making this work, and Tom especially had spent hours and hours and hours in his workshop and in his studio making all this imagery. That actually, and we fortunate enough to get this grant, this money from the Arts Council, which hasn't been forthcoming since then. There was obviously something about this that drew their attention, but I wanted to make sure that we delivered this work and found an audience with it. So I think on that night we had 400 people come and see see it, and we've exhibited the work subsequently in Kendal and Clitheroe,
Oh, wow.
and a couple of other places. So it's travelled a bit as well, and it was a real kickstart to my sort of career as a photographer. It got me a lot of recognition in terms of finding a way and people knowing that I was a photographer in the first place, to a degree that was more than just someone who had a camera. It allowed me to think I can do this professionally.
Right. Okay.
Which was a very important step for me, really. But I mean, it's very important to try and deliver anything you do to an audience. And actually, as part of the remit of an Arts Council grant, they say, who are you reaching out to, and how are you going to engage your audience and stuff. So, I used social media and existing contacts and stuff, and I know that the work was seen by a huge number of people online as well as in person. So it's a very gratifying thing to go through in terms of delivering a project, and that sort of methodology is very much informed how I go about delivering sort of subsequent bodies of work.
Yeah, you self-published quite a bit, really. I mean, you've done quite a bit. I mean,
yeah, and whether that's a small zine I've done 30 copies of, or whether some very personal work that I just wanted to have something in print of, or whether that's something that I've kickstarted and raised thousands of pounds and done on a much larger scale.
How was kickstarting something and raising money through Kickstarter? How did you find all that process?
Well, that was for a very different project called Loved and Lost, a documentary project, which invites participants to sort of restage an old family photograph of someone who's passed away and record an interview. So that was a very different audience, and that I'd been working on that for 6 years before I asked anybody for any money. So I'd been making all these stories, and it had lots of media coverage in The Guardian, from BBC Breakfast TV and that sort of thing, before I'd thought about making a book and making a product. So I think by that point I'd spent a long time investing in developing that audience. So by the time I asked them to kickstart it and pop in 15, 20 quid or whatever it was for a copy of the book, that I mean, obviously it's a nerve-wracking thing to do, and you have to overcome that barrier of asking people for money, and but I mean, I was very fortunate to have a great designer. I knew I'd have a great product at the end of it, and I'd spent enough time working on the project to believe that I was going to create something worthwhile. So I mean, having said that, I've got about 500 copies sat just over there, so if anyone wants one.
Actually, I backed you in that project.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Because you did a pitch at Oriel Colwyn, which was interesting, and that sort of made me go to your site when you started pushing it on social media.
Well, thank you very much.
I've got a question for you here. How do you find the gallery scene in the UK in general?
Oh gosh, it's hard work, I think.
Are they receptive to
a certain degree? Yeah, I mean, the image we're looking at now, that was the Whitworth, and they granted us one evening as part of a sort of opening later series. The Edges project was shown as part of Kendal Mountain Festival at the Brewery Arts Centre in Kendal as well. So obviously that was very in keeping with the work and according to the festival. And then the Loved and Lost project, it was being shown in Sheffield Museum. Was closed down a little bit short due to the virus. But beyond that, I mean, I've written countless applications and tried to meet plenty of curators and get in touch with them and show work, and I've tried to get funding for plenty of projects which hasn't been forthcoming. And it's not easy, and I mean, it's not even just circumstantial, it's not even just down to who you know anymore. There's just there's fewer opportunities, and so I think that's why over the years I've self-published, and I've got my work seen by putting on exhibitions and making sure that, we, as part of the collective, we showed work at Brighton Photo Biennial, but no one was going to give us a space, so we took a punt and shelled out money to rent a small gallery space which was opposite the pavilions, where we knew all the industry people and whoever we're going to be, and made sure that we were open at the right time after all the events and parties to sort of usher them in and give them free drinks. And I mean, it's just you have to just, sometimes you have to take a punt, but it's work. You slog over the years to try and but I mean, you know, I talked about this a little bit with Brian the other day, is that, you know, photographers have to realize that this sort of thing and making a project is a bit of a luxury, really. You know, you have to work as a photographer. Being a gigging photographer is a very different discipline to being a sort of fine art photographer. But actually, it's, you know, you can do things side by side. But I don't rely on selling books and exhibitions and prints to make a living.
No. I mean, you live in Manchester. I mean, Manchester seems to me like, I've only been to Manchester a couple of times, but it seems to me like a very vibrant sort of place, and lots is going on, and probably friendlier than London and places like that. I mean, are there photographic festivals in Manchester? Can you tap into that sort of scene there?
So I mean, the short answer is no. There's no photo festivals. There's no photo gallery.
Right.
We have a network called Red Eye, which I've engaged with a lot as my career has developed, and they're extremely good at bringing people together, hosting talks, and running sort of development schemes and that sort of thing, which I've taken part in, and that's been useful, because it feels like you're connecting with sort of broader industry and other photographers, and that can be a very healthy thing to do. But Manchester in itself doesn't really have much of a photographic community in a sort of,
that's very surprising,
in a gallery sense. Well, we've got Open Eye over in Liverpool, which is only an hour away, and we've got Impressions in Bradford, which again is less than an hour away. So actually, it's sort of covered, but it's not covered in Manchester. And the amount of conversations I've had with people who've said, "Well, why don't you start a photo gallery in Manchester?" Well, it's one thing. It's one thing talking about it. It's another thing to do it. But yeah, I mean, again, I've applied to show work at Open Eye and to Impressions, and had no's. You know, so I ended up showing the work in Sheffield in a public gallery, and to an audience that was more receptive because of the subject matter than they were than the medium. So I think actually, and I mean, talking about showing the work in Kendal again, I think photography has that ability to be about something more than photography. Not that other art forms don't, but you know, in a way, you know, finding an audience through engaging with the subject matter I think is extremely important, and it also opens up your audience far wider than you know, if you're making a book and you're making a photo book, the amount of people who buy photo books who are photographers and in the photo industry is very limited. But if you're making a book about something that's of another subject matter, whether that's the landscape or whether it's, you know, loss, or, you know, connected to music or a certain community or certain geographical area, then you suddenly open yourself out to a much broader audience. So you have to be savvy with these things when you're deciding what projects am I going to spend, you know, however many years on.
Right. I mean, sort of drawing the sort of conversation to a close. What are you working on at the moment? Has the coronavirus hit you at all, in the sense of being helping you with a project or thinking about projects?
It certainly curtailed things. I've done one shoot in the last 3 months, and that was for Guardian Weekend. It was a fashion piece which is going to be out in the Saturday weekend paper this week. I mean, in terms of projects, I've had something ongoing for a little while, sort of exploring sibling relationships, in quite a sort of aesthetic sense, and sort of bringing that in with other images, location-based images, and trying to build sort of an aesthetic around that, as well as a sort of narrative of me sort of searching for what it means to be a sibling, to have a sibling, to understand sort of that relationship, not in a sort of documentary way, in a more sort of expressive sense. So that's something that is ongoing, and I'm trying to see if there's anyone who might be interested in publishing that at the moment. But aside from that, I've spent the last 3 months working on music, because I can sit at a keyboard in front of me here and record music and have fun with it, and try stuff out with that, which is what my education was in and what I always thought I'd end up doing before I took up photography. So
Yeah.
but I mean, I've got shoots lined up and work lined up for as soon as I'm able to get back. Some in North Wales and others. Actually, both significant shoots I've got lined up are in Wales. So
Oh wow.
I'll be popping over to visit a few times, hopefully before the end of the year, if we can make everything work.
Well, if you come down to Pembrokeshire way, you must give me a shout.
I will do. I'll give you a nod. Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much, Simon.
Absolute
Cheers.
pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.